Okay, this is the first video in Origin of Life unit, and we're going to talk about biochemistry, or the molecules that are found in living things. So the first molecule we're going to talk about is water, and water is a polar molecule, and it is polar because it has an uneven distribution of charge. So the oxygen is electronegative, meaning that it has a negative end to it. So the electrons are not shared evenly, and so this end of the molecule, the oxygen end of the molecule, ends up being more negatively charged. And the hydrogen sides, because they're not getting their share of the electrons, become more positively charged. And so even though the molecule is neutral, across space it has an uneven distribution of charge, and therefore we call it polar, and it acts like a charged molecule. So the bond that forms between the hydrogen and the oxygen in this case is a polar covalent bond. So it's a covalent bond, they're sharing electrons, but the electrons are not shared equally. And we have this cluster of unpaired electrons over on this side that bend the molecule and make it so that this end is more positive and this end is more negative. Okay, so as a result of this, we're going to see a lot of different properties of water, but it all comes back to being polar. So the water, because it's polar, it forms these hydrogen bonds. So what happens is one end of the molecule that's negative is going to be attracted to the positive end of another water molecule, and the positive end is going to be attracted to the negative end of another water molecule, and the negative end to another positive, and so on. So we get these hydrogen bonds that are occurring within the molecule. The water molecules can also interact with other polar molecules and form hydrogen bonds. And if they do that, we call those molecules hydrophilic, or water-loving. Molecules that are non-polar don't do this. They will not interact with water, and we call them hydrophobic, or water-fearing or water-hating. Okay, another property of water is that it's cohesive, or the water molecules, if you think of adhesion as sticking together, cohesion, right? These are water molecules sticking together. So the water molecules are attracted to each other due to this hydrogen bonding. And so this allows us to form water droplets, or this water droplet could form on the bottom of the leaf as well and hang against gravity. But the water molecules are so attracted to each other that rather than spreading out on the leaf, they form little beads of water. This attraction of these water molecules also serves to form like a skin on the surface of water, and we call that surface tension. So here's a water strider skimming across the surface of the water, and it can do that because of this surface tension. If you've ever water skied, you've taken advantage of surface tension. If you've ever done a belly flop, you've experienced firsthand surface tension. So that surface tension forms like a skin, and you need to break those bonds to penetrate the water. And so if you have a large surface area of your body hitting the water, it can be quite painful. And another concept which we'll explore later is transpiration, and that's how trees get water from their roots, from the soil, all the way up their long trunks to the leaves at the very, very top. And that's a concept we'll explore later. Water also has a very high specific heat because of this polarity and these hydrogen bonds. So it takes a lot of energy to change the temperature of water. And so that makes it so that water acts as a very good temperature moderator. So if you look at the Earth, it's mostly water. And if you live near a body of water, the temperature in that climate is going to be much more moderate. You're going to have less fluctuations in temperature from day to night, from season to season. If you lived in a desert where there's no water, you would have very, very cold nights and very, very hot days. You live on the coast, near the Sound, and I live inland a little bit, and I get more snow than you do. So my daughter tends to get more snow days than you guys do down in Fairfield, and that's because you live on the Sound. Another property of water is it has a high heat of vaporization, meaning that it takes a lot of energy to convert it from a liquid to a gas. And so we take advantage of that with evaporative cooling. So we cool ourselves by water or sweat evaporating off of our skin. And that when that water is going from a liquid to a gaseous state, it requires energy, and that loss of energy you feel as cooling. And water also is a very good solvent, so it dissolves things. It does such a good job, we refer to it as the universal solvent. So here I have a block of salt that's placed in water, and it's going to dissolve in the water. And so what happens is the water actually forms these like hydration shells around the ions. So here a chloride ion gets separated with this hydration shell and a sodium ion, and the water molecules will continue to wrap around these different, and again, it's the along here all the positive, the hydrogens are going to attach or be attracted to this negative ion, and over here all the oxygen end of it will be attracted to this positively charged ion, and it will continue to form these hydration cells and dissolve the sodium chloride. It can also do that with polar covalent molecules like sugar. It doesn't have to be an ionic compound. Now, because water is such a good solvent, it also will dissolve acids, and when they ionize, they will release hydrogen ions, or bases in our body, which will accept hydrogen ions. And the problem with that is just that we want to maintain a constant pH. So different parts of your body have different pHs. So if we start with distilled water at 7, neutral, our blood is slightly basic, our urine is slightly acidic, our saliva just a little more acidic than that, and our stomach acid very, very acidic, like a 1.5. So we don't want our stomach to become basic, because the enzymes that work in our stomach only work at low pHs and they would not function properly. So we need things that are going to maintain the pH of our blood, and we do that by using these buffers. And so buffers just help to maintain homeostasis, or a constant state, or constant internal conditions. And so we do that with these buffers, and these buffers act as weak acids or bases, so they can accept protons or release protons depending on the pH, or if protons are been released into that solution or taken up by that solution, and so they can adjust things to keep your pH constant. Okay, I'm going to introduce the organic compounds and then talk about some of their properties. In the next lecture, we're going to go into more detail on each of these groups. So in the biomolecules, we have inorganic water, which we've been talking about, and then we have 4 classes of organic compounds. So we have proteins, we have carbohydrates, we have nucleic acids, and we have lipids. And all of these are built by with these building blocks, these monomers, these building units, and they form polymers. So mono one, poly many. So we put monomers together to form polymers. So proteins are made up of amino acids, and we're going to spend a lot of time studying those. Carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, are made up of sugar monomers, or simple sugars, and we can also refer to those as monosaccharides, or one sugars. And those are linked together to form polysaccharides, or many sugars. The next class is the nucleic acids, and those are RNA and DNA. And they're built from 4 different kinds of nucleotides, and you probably remember those, and they're by their letters anyways, A, T, C, G, and U. And then the last group don't really play so well by this monomer-polymer game, but the lipids. And those are the nonpolar molecules, and so we'll spend time talking about those as well. When we're looking at these different molecules, we're going to be looking for groups that are attached to these carbon chains, and these groups that are attached to the carbon chains are going to determine the properties of that particular molecule. So there are 5 groups that you should be familiar with. So the first functional group is an OH group, or a hydroxyl group. And in my diagram here, I have an R. That R just represents some kind of carbon chain, ring, branching, but some kind of carbon and hydrogen, and there could be some oxygen or sulfur or phosphorus or nitrogen also attached to them. Okay, so in this case, my example is ethanol. And so when we add a hydroxyl group, we make an alcohol. And so it's going to end in OL. And so this right here makes it an alcohol, this hydroxyl group. And so ethanol is 2 carbons with hydrogens attached. Remember, carbon's going to have 4 covalent bonds. The next group is aldehydes. Now, aldehydes have a double bond to oxygen. So the carbon's double bonded to the oxygen. And remember, carbon's going to have 4 covalent bonds. So one to the carbon chain and another one to hydrogen. So this is where we find this is where we find a double bond to oxygen at the end of a molecule. So an example of that is an acetaldehyde. So we have a carbon, double bond to oxygen with a hydrogen, and then that's attached to some kind of R group. In this case, a methyl, a carbon with 3 hydrogens. We can also find this carbon double bond to oxygen in the middle of a molecule. And when that happens, we call it a ketone. So here we have a carbon double bond to oxygen, and it's flanked by 2 R groups. So an example of that is acetone, which is what we use to remove nail polish. So we have our carbon double bond to oxygen, and then we have a methyl group over here and a methyl group over here. So it's in the middle of a carbon chain. All right. And the last 2 groups are carboxyl groups and amino groups. And these make the molecule either acidic or basic. So the carboxyl group acts as an acid. So here we have actually kind of an aldehyde and a hydroxyl together. So we have carbon double bond to oxygen, and that same carbon is attached to an OH group. So the combination makes it a carboxyl group, and these tend to donate protons, so we call them acids. And this is a picture of acetic acid, which is vinegar. So we have the carbon double bond to oxygen, single bond to the OH group, attached to some kind of R, in this case methyl. And then the amino groups, we're going to see these quite a bit, is a nitrogen attached to 2 hydrogens. And this tends to accept protons and ionize, so therefore it acts as a base. So an example of that is methylamine. And so here we have our amine, our N with our 2 H's, and a methyl group attached to it. So those are the functional groups that you're going to start becoming familiar with and be able to identify in a molecule. And the last thing I wanted to talk about in this lecture is how we take monomers and link them together to form polymers, and then how we take those polymers and break them apart to form the monomers. So think in terms of you eat a meal and you have lots of big macromolecules, these big molecules inside of your stomach and in your intestines, and you need to break those down so that they can be absorbed by your blood. And then they travel to your blood somewhere, and now you're going to use those to build something back up again. So you're constantly breaking these things down and building them back up again. So the first type of reaction is referred to as either a condensation reaction, here's a condensation reaction, or a dehydration reaction, 2 names for the same thing. But the reason they're named that is because of the water that's involved. So either water is kind of being formed, or we're losing water from our molecule, however you want to think about it. So here we have a monomer, and it's always going to have an H on one end and no H on the other end. And here we have another one, and we're going to link them together. So in order to do that, we're going to need to remove this OH from one side and this H from the other side, and then this can link to this. And so we've formed this little red bond here. And in the process, we've removed a water molecule. Now we want to link another one on. We'd have to remove the OH from one side, the H from another side. Off goes another water molecule, and we get another link in our chain. So each one of these links, we've had to remove a water molecule in order to make them. Now we can break this apart. But if we're going to break it apart, we need to add water. And so we get the next type of reaction, which is called a hydrolysis reaction. Or hydro means water, lysis means breaking. So we're going to use water to break bonds. So here we have a polymer, and we're going to break off this unit right here. And so we need to add water. So part of the water, the OH goes on one side, the H goes on the other side. And so now we have a monomer. And now we're going to break these 2. Again, we add another molecule of water, and then we have 2. So we end up with 1, 2, 3. That's 3 separate units. Okay, that's the end of the first lecture for the Origins of Life unit. Hope this helped.